In the earliest days of the Jedi Order, long before the rise of the Sith as we know them, there lived a man by the name of Rajavari. His name is often spoken only in whispered, remembered as the first traitor, the first to break from the Jedi. But to understand Rajavari is to understand that he was not born a villain. He was not a man who sought war or conquest or glory. Rajavari began his life as a defender, a seeker of wisdom, and one of the wisest of the Jedi. He became a general only when the galaxy demanded it, and a rebel only when his conflict with the Jedi's philosophy consumed him. His life is a tragedy, the story of a good man who picked up the sword time and time again out of duty, only to fail in the very shadow that he once fought to hold back. Rajavari's first true test came in the war with the infinite empire of the Rakata. The Rakata were conquerors wielding the Force as a tool of domination and enslavement. Their empire stretched across the stars, crushing worlds beneath their dark technology. And when they came to the world of Tython, the Jedi were forced to stand against them. Rajavari emerged as one of the most brilliant generals in the war. In the Despot War, he led the Jedi armies into battle, securing victory after victory. But his triumphs were not born of hunger or of power. But for Rajavari, this war was about survival. He fought to preserve the Order and to protect Tython itself from being consumed by tyranny. And when the fighting ended, Rajavari did something that set him apart from so many other warriors of his age. He laid down his weapon. Rather than cling to the command, he withdrew to an island near the temple of Akar Kesh, meditating in solitude. His retreat showed who he truly was, a man who longed for peace, who never sought conquest, but who had been willing to fight when his people had needed him the most. But peace did not last. The Rakatan invasion left scars, and those scars split the Jedi apart. For centuries, the Jedi had lived by a code of balance, Ashla the light and Bogan the dark. But in the shadow of the Rakata, the balance had collapsed. Some Jedi looked at the Rakatan technology and the Dark Empire and saw strength. They declared that survival could only be ensured through conquest, and that Bogan alone held the keys to power. Others clung to Ashla, arguing that serenity and restraint were the only paths forward. The result was what is known as the Force Wars of Tython. It was one of the most destructive civil wars in all of galactic history. Jedi armies raised banners against one another, temples were burned, force storms ravaged the surface of Tython, and for the first time, the Force was turned against itself. Rajavari, who had sworn off the sword, now faced the same choice once more. He saw the Bogan-aligned Jedi becoming conquerors, mirroring the Rakata that they had just defeated. And so, though his heart longed for peace, Rajavari took up the blade yet again. He sided with the Ashla faction, not out of blind devotion to the light side, but out of fear that the Dark Jedi would annihilate the Order, Tython, and everything that he loved. He joined the war again as a general, not because he wanted to, but because he believed he had no other choice. Rajavari's life was defined by this tension, a good man reluctant to fight, but always willing to when the galaxy forced his hand. And now we reached the founding of the Jedi Order. When the Force Wars ended, the Ashla-aligned Jedi declared victory. The balance of Ashla and Bogan was no more, and in its place rose a new creed, the Jedi Order. The Jedi did not walk the middle path. They rejected the dark side entirely. There is no emotion, there is peace. To the Jedi, balance was not harmony, it was danger. Darkness was not a mystery, it was corruption. For his wisdom and leadership, Rajavari was made a member of the First Jedi High Council. He also became the Order's very first Jedi Archivist, creating the Jedi Archives and training the very first lore keepers. He was a founder, a teacher, and one of the most respected voices among the new Jedi Order. But unlike many, Rajavari was already conflicted. The Jedi Master did not believe that the dark side should be embraced, but he also did not believe that it should be erased entirely. To him, the Jedi were not mastering the Force, they were blinding themselves to it. He feared that by denying the dark, the Jedi were building their order on fear, and that eventually that fear would destroy them. So even when he sat upon the council, Master Rajavari began preserving what the other Jedi would have had him erase. He built what is known as the Font of Rajavari. This was a hidden archive where forbidden knowledge, Rakatan relics, Jedi teachings, and truths that the Jedi feared could be safeguarded. To Rajavari, this was not a betrayal, it was protection. But in time, that decision would lead him down a much darker path, Rajavari's departure and rebellion. For years, Rajavari served on the Jedi Council. He guided the young Order, built its archives, and trained its very first lore keepers. But the conflict inside of him would never leave. Rajavari did not see himself as the enemy of the Jedi, but he believed that their obsession with the light alone was a dangerous one. The Council burned or locked away knowledge that spoke of Bogan, fearful of what could happen if it was ever studied. To Rajavari, this was blindness. He remembered the Rakata, who had nearly enslaved the galaxy by hoarding their own knowledge, and he feared that the Jedi were now making the opposite mistake, destroying truths that they did not want to face. In secret, Rajavari began to preserve these teachings in the font of Rajavari, Rakatan relics, Qua holocrons, and old records that the Council deemed too dangerous. Rajavari would keep them all. He told himself that he was safeguarding wisdom the Jedi would one day need, but in time this secrecy cut him off from the Order, and his conviction hardened into pride. Eventually, Rajavari walked away from the Council altogether. He did not vanish quietly, though. He raised an army, not a small sect of philosophers, but a literal force of followers. Jedi Knights, Adepts, and Seekers rallied to him, convinced that his vision of balance and hidden truths was the real path to enlightenment. For the first time since the Force Wars, Tython once again faced civil war, this time against one of the Jedi's own founders. Rajavari would choose as his fortress the ancient Temple of Knowledge. Kaleth is what they called it. To him, it was more than a base of war, it was a symbol. By holding Kaleth, Rajavari was declaring himself more enlightened than the Council itself. But it was not enough to lead an army. Rajavari also sought to reshape his disciples. He called them his children in the Force, but he tested them relentlessly. Trials that tempted them with the very powers the Jedi had forbidden. Qua relics, Rakatan artifacts, and artifacts from the Force Wars as well. Rajavari laid them all before his students, and told them to master their temptation. This was long before the era of the Sith. Yet in Rajavari we see the first glimmers of a Sith Lord's methods. He was not satisfied with students who obeyed, he wanted disciples who wrestled with power, who embraced at least some of the dark to reach true enlightenment. He became the gatekeeper of both forbidden truths, tempting those who followed him with knowledge and power, forcing them all to see him as the only one capable of interpreting both the Ashla and the Bogan. In this, Rajavari was a proto-Sith. Not yet a Sith in name, but a man who used knowledge as a weapon, binding others through temptation. What began as a preservation of truths became something darker, an attempt to prove that only he could unite light and dark into one single unifying path. The Jedi Order could not ignore Rajavari's rebellion. His fortress in Kaleth stood as both a military threat and a philosophical challenge to the Council's authority, and so they decided to march against it for war. The siege of Kaleth was fierce. Rajavari and his followers fought with conviction, but they were outnumbered and outmatched. In the end, the rebellion collapsed, but Rajavari's end is remembered in two different ways. Some say he was cut down by Jedi blades, falling in battle beside the very disciples he had raised against the Council. Others whispered that he retreated deeper into the Kaleth itself, consumed by the very knowledge and relics he had hoarded, destroyed by the power the Council had always feared. Whether by the blade or for the hunger of his own forbidden truths, Rajavari's rebellion ended in ruin. His army scattered, his fortress fell, not big enough to be a schism, something the Jedi would underplay for centuries that would follow, causing the rebellion of Rajavari to fall deeper into mystery. Many believe it was a cover-up by the wider Council to show that they were more stable than they truthfully were in their very beginning. The Jedi declared his teachings lost, his name a stain upon their history. But Rajavari's legacy was not finished yet. Though Rajavari's body was gone, his presence endured. In secret, the font of Rajavari remained hidden, filled with traps, relics, and the dangerous lore that he had preserved. And more than that, his spirit lingered. Against all expectations, Rajavari became one of the first known Force ghosts in all of Star Wars lore. This fact alone is astounding. The ability to retain one's identity after death was considered nearly impossible, a secret thought lost even to the greatest of Jedi. And yet, Rajavari achieved it. Despite his dual alliance with the light and the dark, this meant that he had tapped into knowledge far older than the Jedi ever realized, knowledge predating the very foundations of the Jedi Order. But in death, Rajavari remained what he had been in life, conflicted. His ghost tempted seekers like the Twi'lek Nalen, who stumbled upon the font centuries later. Rajavari's teachings nearly corrupted him, pushing him towards destruction. But when the young Jedi Padawan confronted Rajavari's spirit, something remarkable happened. The ghost of Rajavari finally admitted his mistakes. He confessed that his pride and fear had blinded him. And at last, after centuries of unrest, Rajavari chose to let go. He surrendered his bitterness, released his hold on the font, and became one with the Force. Rajavari's story is not the story of a villain, nor is it the story of a simple hero. It is the story of a man defined by conflict. He was the first great general of the Jedi, a defender who picked up the sword only when his people needed him. He was one of the first counselors of the Jedi, guiding them at their very birth. He was the first archivist, preserving knowledge others would have destroyed. He was the first to rebel, raising an army not for conquest, but because he believed the Jedi had blinded themselves. He may have even been the first to become a Force ghost, transcending death itself. But he was also the first to fall. Yet his pride twisted him into using temptation to control others. He wanted to protect knowledge, but in hoarding it, he nearly destroyed the Jedi that he had once sworn to protect. Rajavari began as a good man, a protector of Tython, a seeker of wisdom, but he lived a life of conflict that ended in rebellion. He is not remembered as a Sith, for the Sith as we know of them did not exist yet. But Rajavari was the shadow before the shadow, the prototype of what was to come. In Rajavari, we see the first cracks of the Jedi, the first fallen Jedi, the first proof that even its greatest founders could not escape the pull of pride. They could not control their fear, and the eternal struggle between light and dark. Rajavari's tragedy is that he was right about the dangers of denial, but wrong in how he sought to answer them. And so Rajavari stands as a reminder that the Jedi have been haunted by their own shadows since the very moment that they were born. But anyway, my fellow lore junkies, what are your thoughts on this? What are your thoughts on the very first Jedi Master to fall to the dark side, in Master Rajavari? Was he right? What are your thoughts on his wars, his conflicts, his triumphs, and his fall? As always, may the Force be with you, and I hope you're having an amazing day.